Howdy. Since some folks were having trouble with some run-on sentences in our writing assignment number one, I thought I would maybe offer just a short video that will cover some of those. Let's start with what a run-on sentence is. A run-on sentence happens when you've got a fully independent sentence that could stand on its own as a complete thought, connected to another fully complete sentence that could stand on its own, but they're only connected with a comma or nothing at all. The simplest way to fix those is a period, but the main problem is most of us just don't notice when they happen. So take a look at this first sentence, just a generic sentence here. It's clear that there are a lot of comma issues in this paper. I'm going to take it to the writing center to get some help with those. Those two ideas are very closely related. However, each one could stand alone as a simple sentence. So generally there are three simple ways to fix a run-on. First and most easily, we can put in a period. Now that I've got a period, I've got two separate sentences, all is good. The second thing I can do is find a way to connect them. That is, I could either offer a coordinating conjunction, sorry to get all grammatical on you, but for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are our coordinating conjunctions. And I could use the one that makes the most sense here. In this case, since the second sentence is kind of a result of the first, I could do so. When I add one of those fanboys, as we call them, we always put a comma before the fanboy. So it's clear there are a lot of issues in this paper, comma, so I'm going to take it to the writing center. That'd be another way. A third way to fix it is the semicolon. A semicolon can only be used to separate two independent thoughts, but if they're so closely related, then a semicolon is fine. So that's how you can fix it in a generic sentence. However, we move next to what's going to happen in our actual paper. Here we're integrating quotes. Most of the time that people are having trouble with run-ons, it's because they're integrating a quote. So for instance, I write, Mrs. Johnson is moved by Maggie's willingness to give up the quilts to her sister. That's a complete sentence. Then I add the quote, when I looked at her like that, something hit me in the top of my head and ran down to the soles of my feet. I've seen a lot of these already. So if this is the case, I've got this fully complete sentence first, leading in, and now the quote itself is a fully complete sentence, so I've got a run-on. Now the problem here is, of those two fixes I just gave you, I'd say, well, hey, I'm just going to stick a period here, and I'm great. Except, now the quote is not integrated. It's not being made part of my own sentence structure. Okay, we say, I'll throw in that semicolon you mentioned. I can use that. Well, the problem again is a semicolon doesn't coordinate between the two sentences. I still have a run-on. This is where a third punctuation mark can help. So, you've already been seeing here, I have ways to fix. Probably the easiest is to insert a colon. The colon is different from the semicolon in that what the colon, says is what comes after it is an example of or a completion of the thought I just started. So now I would read, Mrs. Johnson is moved by Maggie's willingness to give up the quilts to her sister. Here's a quote to show that. That's what the colon does. So the colon will generally integrate any quote you need to use, and therefore it's an easy way to fix. All right. However, sometimes I can try to find a verbal. A verbal is a verb that ends in ing that maybe connects the ideas. Maybe here I could say, when Mrs. Johnson is moved by Maggie's willingness to give up the quilts to her sister, and I could use a comma and perhaps put in thinking, when I looked at her like that, something hit me in the top of my head. Notice I'm using thinking because she's not speaking this narration out loud, she's thinking it. Now the whole sentence works because the verbal thinking has made this second part subordinated to the first. And if that doesn't make sense, just say it works. It's great. So that'd be the second way. Another way I could do it is just go ahead and do put in that period, but now attribute the quote. To attribute a quote means to add in some statement noting who said it or thought it. Well, here, instead of thinking, I could write something like, she thinks, comma, when I looked at her like that, something hit me in the top of my head and ran down to the soles of my feet. A comma in this case is used when we attribute the quote by saying, he says, she thinks, they yelled, or whatever the case may be. So there's some ways we can fix that. One more example, just to be sure, from the lottery. Tessie is outraged by her family's selection. That's clearly a complete thought. The second part in the quote, I tell you it wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. In that case, that part is also independent. So, using my three ways, I could go back, insert a colon, and it would work fine. Or I could say Tessie is outraged by her family's selection, comma, saying, I tell you it wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. Or perhaps Tessie is outraged by her family's selection, period. She yells, because I assume she's yelling, I tell you it wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. So I hope that gives you some examples of ways that you can fix those in your own writing.